When I first decided to retire from the bench after 25 years of serving as a county judge, I knew I didn't want to use your retirement experience of moving to Florida or Arizona like so many of my colleagues. I wasn't cut out for golf courses, fancy resorts, or endless sunshine. What I wanted was peace, quiet, genuine peace. The kind I had only ever felt in my younger days when I'd take weekend trips out to the old lake country. There was something about the water, the smell of the pines, the crunch of gravel underfoot, and the silence broken only by loons calling across the water that gave me a sense of clarity I couldn't find in a courtroom packed with angry defendants and frustrated attorneys. So when I stumbled across a cabin for sale on a lake tucked far enough away from the main highways that you couldn't hear traffic, but close enough to town that you could get groceries without driving 2 hours, I didn't hesitate. I bought it outright. The cabin wasn't fancy. In fact, it was downright rustic, just 1.5 stories, cedar siding that had seen better years, a dock that leaned slightly to one side, and a chimney that looked like it had been patched together by some optimistic do-it-yourselfer who'd been half in the bag when he did it. But to me, it was paradise. The previous owner had passed away, and his children, who had no use for it, put on the market. I had outbid a local developer who wanted to tear it down and put up some gaudy, modern lakeside mansion that didn't belong in this kind of place. I wasn't going to let that happen. I put in an aggressive cash offer, and by the grace of God and the stubbornness of my own will, I got it. Now, here's the thing about small towns and lakeside communities. They change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. When I first started visiting this area back in the late 80s, it was all locals, fishermen, retirees, and summer campers. But over the years, more outsiders moved in, bringing with them their suburban ideas of rules, control, and appearances. That's how the HOA came to be. I despised HOAs. Always had. They were little kingdoms run by petty tyrants who got a thrill out of controlling where people could park, what color they could paint their houses, and how long their grass was allowed to grow. And the queen tyrant of this particular HOA, a woman named Karen. Now, I don't use that name lightly. Her actual name was Karen. And boy, did she live up to it. I'd heard whispers about her long before I moved in, that she once made a man take down a birdhouse because it didn't match the neighborhood's color scheme, that she tried to find a widow $300 because her grandkids chalked on the driveway, and that she patrolled the neighborhood with a clipboard and a camera phone like she was some kind of self-appointed sheriff. People rolled their eyes when they talked about her, but most of them complied because they didn't want to deal with the hassle of standing up to her. But here's where things get interesting. My cabin wasn't actually under the HOA. See, back when the HOA was formed, this particular stretch of lakeshore was privately owned and never joined. The association tried to claim the land years later, but the courts shot them down. I had checked all the paperwork twice before I bought the cabin, because the last thing I wanted in retirement was dealing with people like her. Legally, I was in the clear. Practically, I was stepping into a hornet's nest. The very first day I started moving in, I could feel eyes on me. I pulled up in my old Chevy truck, hauling a trailer full of boxes, tools, and furniture I didn't mind scuffing up a bit. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I planned to spend the first week doing some cleaning, patching the dock, and hauling in firewood before winter started to creep in. I was halfway through unloading when I heard it. The sharp, unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat like a warning shot. I turned around and there she was, Karen, mid-50s, tightly permed hair the color of straw, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a neon pink windbreaker that looked like it came straight out of a 1992 jogging catalog. In one hand, she clutched a clipboard, in the other, a stainless steel travel mug that I suspected contained more Chardonnay than coffee. She looked me up and down like I was a stray dog she had just caught rummaging through her trash. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through wood. "Can I help you?" I set the box I was carrying down on the porch and wiped my hands on my jeans. "No, ma'am. Just moving in." Her eyes narrowed. "Moving in? To this cabin?" "That's right," I replied evenly. "Bought a few weeks back." Her jaw worked as if she was chewing on the information, and then her lips thinned into a line. "This property falls under the jurisdiction of the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association. I'm the president." She said it like she was announcing she was a queen of England. I already knew where this was going, but I let her play it out. "Well, ma'am, I did my homework before I bought the place. This cabin isn't part of your association." That stopped her for half a second. Just half. Then she straightened her shoulders and sniffed. That's not correct. All properties along this section of the lake are subject to HOA rules. That includes you. You'll need to submit a request form for that trailer. By the way, they're not permitted unless approved. I chuckled. I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. With all due respect, you're wrong. And I've got the court documents to prove it. This land was exempt from your association from day one. Karen's face flushed, and I could practically see the steam rising from her ears. We'll see about that, she snapped. And with that, she stormed off, mumbling something about calling the board. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did, but I underestimated her. People like Karen don't back down when confronted with facts. They double down. And sure enough, not 20 minutes later, as I was setting up my bed frame inside, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. At first, I figured it was a delivery truck, or maybe one of the neighbors coming by to introduce themselves. Instead, I stepped out onto the porch and saw a county sheriff's cruiser pulling up my driveway. Karen stood beside it, arms crossed, looking smugger than a cat who just swallowed a canary. The deputy stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his belt, and started walking up toward me. My heart gave a little jump, not out of fear, but out of surprise, because I recognized him immediately. Deputy Johnson. Young kid when I first met him years ago, back when he came through my courtroom on a case involving a bar fight. I remember because I had lectured him not as a judge, but as a man, told him he had potential, told him to get his life straightened out before he lost his badge for good. And he did. He'd cleaned up, gotten serious about his job, and last I heard, he'd risen to the ranks of the sheriff's department. But it wasn't his recognition that made the air freeze between us. It was his expression when he looked up and saw me standing there. His steps faltered, his jaw dropped slightly, and he blinked twice before saying, in a voice that carried both disbelief and respect, "Judge, it's you?" The silence that fell in that moment was thick enough to choke on. Karen's smirk froze halfway across her face as she whipped her head around to stare at Deputy Johnson, like he had just betrayed her. For my part, I didn't move. I just stood on that porch, hands resting lightly against the railing, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. After all, I'd spent more than 2 decades controlling courtrooms full of lawyers who wanted nothing more than to fill silence with their endless arguments. If there's one thing I'd learned, it's that silence can be a weapon sharper than any blade. "Judge Harper?" Johnson said again, this time with certainty. His shoulders squared, his posture stiffening the way a soldier snaps to attention in the presence of general. "Sir, I didn't realize this was your property." Before I could answer, Karen cut in, her voice shrill with disbelief. "Judge? What do you mean, judge? He's just some squatter. He doesn't belong here. I told you, this property is under HOA jurisdiction. He can't just—" Johnson held up a hand, cutting her off with a calm authority that surprised even me. "Ma'am, I'll handle this." Karen's mouth snapped shut, but her eyes burned with fury. She wasn't used to being silenced. That much was clear. I descended the steps slowly, giving Johnson a small smile. "It's been a long time, Deputy. You've come a long way since I last saw you." He flushed slightly, his jaw tightening, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "Yes, sir. I remember. You gave me a chance when others wouldn't. I don't forget things like that." Karen stomped her foot like a petulant child. "Excuse me, are you going to remove him or not? He's trespassing, violating HOA rules, and—" I turned to face her squarely, my voice even but firm. "Ma'am, as I told you earlier, this property is not under your HOA. I bought it fair and square, and I have the court documents to prove it. If you'd like to waste your time challenging again, be my guest, but you'll lose." Again. Her face went crimson. She sputtered, struggling to find words, and finally shrieked, "This is outrageous. You can't just move in here without approval. This is my community." That was when Johnson stepped in fully, his tone clipped and professional. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Judge Harper is within his rights. I'm aware of the history of this property. The HOA has no authority here." Karen gasped like she'd just been slapped. "What? That's not true. That can't be true. You're supposed to enforce the rules." Johnson's expression hardened. "I enforce the law, ma'am, not your personal rules." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen was speechless. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again like a fish out of water. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward her house, muttering something about taking this to the board and lawsuit. When she was finally out of earshot, Johnson let out a breath and shook his head. She hasn't changed a bit, has she? You know her? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, yeah, he said with a chuckle. We get calls from her at least twice a week. She thinks every little thing is a crime. Kids playing basketball too loud, someone parking a car on the street overnight, even people grilling without her approval. She's notorious. I laughed softly. Figures. Some people need to feel important, no matter the cost. Johnson studied me for a moment, his expression softening. You sure about this place, Judge? I mean, it's beautiful out here, but she's not going to stop. She'll make it her mission to drive you out. I smiled, feeling a familiar stubbornness rise in my chest. The same stubbornness that had carried me through decades on the bench, dealing with lawyers who thought they could outwit me and criminals who thought they could intimidate me. I've dealt with worse than her, son. Trust me, I didn't buy this place to let some HOA president chase me away. I came here for peace and I'll have it, whether she likes it or not. Johnson nodded slowly, respect flickering in his eyes. Fair enough. Just watch your back. She's vindictive, and if she can't get you with HOA rules, she'll look for other ways. Noted, I said with a small grin. He tipped his hat, then returned to his cruiser. As he drove away, I felt the first real weight of what I'd stepped in to settle on my shoulders. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat to the peace I'd fought so hard to claim. And if I knew anything from my years on the bench, it was this. People like her don't stop until they're forced to. Sure enough, the very next morning, she was back. This time, she brought reinforcements. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch when I saw them. 3 HOA board members trailing behind her like obedient little ducklings. One was a balding man in a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts, another a woman with a permanent scowl etched into her face, and a third a younger guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Karen marched up my driveway with the confidence of a general leading troops into battle. Mr. Harper, she announced loudly, as though the whole neighborhood needed to hear. We've convened an emergency HOA meeting, and it has been decided that you are in violation of multiple community bylaws. You are hereby ordered to cease moving in until this matter is resolved. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting her words hang in the air before responding. You can order whatever you like, ma'am, but as I told you yesterday, and as Deputy Johnson confirmed, your bylaws don't apply to me. The balding man cleared his throat nervously. Karen, are we sure about this? I mean, if the sheriff said. Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Silence, Tom. He's bluffing. That deputy doesn't know the full situation. I set my cup down on the railing and crossed my arms. Would you like me to get the paperwork? It's all in order. Court rulings, property lines, everything you need to see. Karen sneered. Paperwork can be forged. We'll have our lawyer look into it. Until then, you're trespassing. I couldn't help but laugh. Ma'am, you're welcome to waste your money on lawyers, but you'll find the same answer every time. This property is mine. Not yours. Not the HOA's. Mine. Her face twisted with rage. She turned to her little board of cronies, clearly expecting support. The scowling woman nodded eagerly, while the young guy shifted uncomfortably. The balding man just looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. Fine, Karen snapped finally. If you want to play hardball, we'll play hardball. But don't think for a second that you can just ignore the community's will. We'll see you in court. Looking forward to it. I replied calmly. They stormed off in a huff, leaving me standing there with my coffee, shaking my head in disbelief. I'd dealt with stubborn people before, but Karen was on another level entirely. It wasn't about the property or the rules, or even the law. It was about control. She couldn't stand the idea of someone living outside her reach, and she would stop at nothing to pull me under it. That night, as I sat by the fire inside the cabin, the flames crackling and casting shadows across the old wooden beams, I realized something. This wasn't just about my retirement anymore. This was about standing up to a bully. And if Karen wanted to fight, well, she'd picked the wrong man to tangle with. Over the next few weeks, I learned just how deep Karen's obsession with control ran. If it wasn't one thing, it was another. The day after a so-called emergency HOA meeting, I woke up to find a bright orange flyer taped to my door. Notice of violation. It screamed in bold letters, citing things like unauthorized vehicle on premises, my old Chevy truck, improper storage of materials, my neatly stacked firewood, and even unapproved external modifications, the fact that I'd repaired a broken shutter. I almost laughed myself sick. It was pure harassment, plain and simple. She couldn't touch me legally, so she would try to bury me under a mountain of empty threats. I did what any sane man would do. I ignored them. Into the wood stove they went, one after the other, burned up before they could clutter my cabin. But Karen wasn't used to being ignored. Every time she saw me, she upped the ante. One afternoon, she stood at the edge of my property line, arms crossed, glaring holes through me while I patched up my dock. Another morning, she brought 2 inspectors from her HOA board, who walked around with clipboards muttering to each other as if they had authority. I didn't even bother engaging. I just waved, smiled, and kept working. The angrier she got, the calmer I became. That was a trick I perfected in court. Nothing infuriates bullies more than realizing they don't get to control your reaction. Still, I knew this couldn't last forever. Karen wasn't the type to tire out and give up. No, she was the type to escalate. And sure enough, one chilly October morning, I was proven right. I had just finished splitting a pile of logs for a fireplace and was enjoying the quiet, the kind of silence that settles deep into your bones and makes you feel alive, when I heard tires crunching on my driveway. I looked up and felt my stomach tighten. Another sheriff's cruiser. But this time, it wasn't Johnson. The man who stepped out was older, gruffer, with a permanent scowl etched into his face. Sheriff Daniels. I knew him well from my time on the bench. He was competent, sure, but he had a chip on his shoulder the size of a redwood. We'd butted heads more than once in court over evidence procedures and sloppy police work. He never liked being corrected, especially not by me. Karen slid out of her car right behind him, practically glowing with glee. She looked like a cat bringing home a dead mouse, proud and eager to show off. "There he is," she announced, pointing at me like I was a criminal caught red-handed. "That's the trespasser. He refuses to comply with HOA rules. He's building illegal structures, and he threatened me yesterday when I tried to inspect the property." I raised an eyebrow. Threatened? That was new. I hadn't so much as raised my voice to her. Daniel strode toward me, boots crunching on gravel. "Harper," he barked, "we've had multiple complaints about you. What's going on here?" I set down my axe and wiped my hands on my jeans, keeping my voice level. "What's going on here is that your friend Karen doesn't understand the limits of her authority. This property isn't under her HOA, and she knows it. She's been harassing me since the day I moved in." Karen gasped theatrically. "Harassment? That's absurd. I'm protecting the integrity of this community. We have standards, and he's ignoring every single one of them. Look at this place. Firewood stack without approval, construction on the dock, a rusty old truck ruining the view. It's a disgrace." Daniels frowned, his eyes narrowing. "You got proof this place is an HOA, Harper?" I almost laughed. "Proof? I had boxes of it." "Of course I do. Court rulings, deeds, property lines, you name it. I'll be happy to show you. But let's be clear. This isn't your jurisdiction, Daniels. This is civil, not criminal. You got no business being here on our errand." He bristled, jaw tightening. "Watch your tone, Judge. Retirement doesn't mean you get to talk down to me." I met his glare without flinching. "And wearing a badge doesn't mean you get to enforce rules that aren't law." For a moment, the air was taut, like a bowstring pulled to the breaking point. Karen hovered nearby, her face alight with anticipation, waiting for Daniels to put me in my place. But he didn't. He just grunted, spat into the dirt, and said, "Fine, get me the paperwork." I went inside, pulled out the folder I kept ready for just such an occasion, and handed it over. Daniels leafed through it grudgingly, muttering under his breath. When he finally handed it back, I caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes. He didn't like being wrong. He never had. "Looks solid," he admitted reluctantly. Then he turned on Karen. "This man's property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. You've been wasting my time." Her face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "Wasting your time? I'm trying to keep this community safe. He's dangerous. I told you, he threatened me." Daniels gave her a look so flat it could have ironed a shirt. "Lady, if Judge Harper says he didn't threaten you, I believe him over you any day of the week. I've known him 20 years. He's tough, but he's straight. Don't call me out here again unless you've got a real crime. Karen's jaw dropped. No buts, Daniels growled. You're done. He stalked back to his cruiser, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. She turned on me, her eyes blazing with hatred so pure it made my skin prickle. This isn't over, she hissed. You think you're untouchable because you were a judge? Well, you're not. I'll find a way. I didn't bother answering. I just turned back to my woodpile and picked up the axe again. The best way to beat someone like her is to refuse to give them the reaction they're hunting for. But as the weeks rolled on, I realized Karen wasn't bluffing. She doubled down. She filed bogus complaints with the county zoning board. She tried to have my power shut off by claiming my meter was unsafe. She even sent me phony fines in the mail, handwritten no less, demanding payment to the HOA. Each time, I documented it, shook my head, and added it to the growing pile of evidence. And yet, for all her antics, I found myself almost entertained. After years of presiding over serious matters, felonies, civil disputes, custody battles, this little war with Karen felt like sparring with a yapping dog. Annoying, yes, but hardly life-threatening. I kept reminding myself that bullies thrive on control, and when you deny them that, you've already won half the battle. What I didn't realize then was that Karen wasn't just a bully. She was desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. One night, long after the first snowfall blanketed the lake in silence, I was woken by a sound that didn't belong. A low rumble, followed by the crunch of boots outside my cabin. I reached for the flashlight by my bed, heart steady but alert. Through the window, I saw two figures moving near my dock. At first, I thought it might be kids, maybe teenagers messing around. But then I caught the glint of metal in the moonlight. Tools. They were prying at the supports of my dock. Sabotage. I slipped on my coat and boots, grabbed the old shotgun I kept by the door, not loaded, but I figured they didn't need to know that, and stepped outside. Evening, gentlemen. I called, my voice steady. Care to explain what you're doing on my property? The next morning, the lake was still as glass, the surface reflecting the pale winter sun like a mirror. The quiet should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the unease from the night before. Someone had trespassed on my land, and they hadn't just been lurking, they'd been attempting sabotage. That wasn't harmless HOA pestering anymore. That was criminal. I knew better than to march straight to Karen's doorstep and accuse her. People like her thrive on confrontation. It feeds their sense of power. No, what I needed was patience. Patience, documentation, and strategy, the same tools I had relied on in my courtroom days. If she wanted to escalate this into a war, she was going to find out she'd picked the wrong man to spar with. So, I started keeping records. Every flyer taped to my door, every phony fine, every zoning complaint filed under my name, I copied, dated, and filed them neatly in a binder. When I spotted those figures at my dock, I jotted down the time, the conditions, and the face I recognized. I knew that young HOA board member had a conscience. The guilt was written all over his face that night. He wouldn't be able to keep Karen's secrets for long. A few days later, I got my chance. I was hauling firewood from the shed when I noticed someone lingering at the edge of my property. It was a young man, shoving his hands in his coat pockets, looking nervous as a kid caught sneaking candy. I set the logs down and called out to him. "You gonna stand there all day, son, or are you planning on saying something?" He flinched, then shuffled forward. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the way his shoulders hunched like he was carrying a weight too heavy for his frame. "Judge Harper," he began hesitantly, I wanted to apologize for the other night. I tilted my head. "That was you, wasn't it? At the dock." He swallowed hard and nodded. "Karen," she pressured me, "said it was for the good of the community. I didn't want to do it, but his voice trailed off. "Bullied you into it." I finished for him. He nodded again, shame coloring his face. "What's your name, son?" I asked. "Ethan," he said quietly. "Well, Ethan, let me give you a little advice. You're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't let yourself get dragged into someone else's war. People like Karen, they'll chew you up and spit you out the second you're no longer useful to them." His shoulders sagged. "I know. I didn't want to be the only one standing against her. Everyone else on the board follows her like sheep. I smiled faintly. Sheep only follow the wolf until they realize they're next on the menu. Trust me, she'll turn on them eventually. Question is, are you going to keep letting her drag you down, or are you going to stand up for yourself? He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. I'll quit the board. And if you need a witness about what she's been doing, I'll back you up. That was exactly what I needed. Not because I plan on dragging Karen into court right away, but because I want her to know I could if she pushed me far enough. People like her operate on the assumption that no one will resist. When they realize someone is willing to fight back, their entire empire control begins to crack. Sure enough, when word spread that Ethan had stepped down from the board, and worse, that he'd been seen talking to me, Karen lost her composure. I saw her pacing in her driveway, gesturing wildly to her remaining cronies. The next day, she cornered me while I was raking snow off the roof. You think you're clever, don't you? She snapped, voice shaking with fury, turning people against me, undermining my authority. Well, let me tell you something, Judge. I don't scare easy, and I don't lose. I leaned on the handle of my rake, calm as ever. Everyone loses eventually, Karen. Some just take longer to realize it. Her eyes narrowed. I'll have you out of here. Mark my words. If I can't get you with the HOA, I'll go higher. The county, the state, whatever it takes. I shrugged. Then I'll see you in court. Again. She stormed off, muttering curses under her breath. From that point on, it was open war. She filed complaints with the health department, claiming my septic tank was leaking into the lake. They came, inspected, and found nothing. She tried to get me fined for illegal hunting after she heard gunshots one morning. Never mind that it was deer season, and my neighbor was the one out hunting, not me. She even sent a letter to the power company claiming I was stealing electricity from the grid. Every single time, her claims crumbled under scrutiny. But each time she failed, she came back angrier, more desperate. The community began to notice. At first, people whispered about the new guy who'd move into cabin and immediately locked horns with Karen. But as the months passed and her antics grew more extreme, the whispers shifted. Neighbors stopped to chat with me at the general store, offering sympathetic smiles and shaking their heads at her behavior. Some even confided that they were tired of living under her thumb. One evening, while I was picking up groceries, an older gentleman approached me by the produce aisle. His name was Frank, a retired mechanic who'd lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. You keep standing up to her like that, Judge, he said in a low voice. You're doing us all a favor. We've been cowed by her for too long. Maybe you're the one who can finally put her in her place. I thanked him, but the truth was, I wasn't looking to be anyone's hero. I just wanted peace. Still, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing her grip on the community was slipping. Kara must have sensed it too, because she grew bolder. One night, just as the first hints of spring thaw were arriving, she made her most audacious move yet. I was inside, reading by the fire, when I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on my porch. Heavy, deliberate. I set my book down, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the door. There stood Karen, clipboard in hand, flanked by two of her most loyal board members. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. You're finished here, she declared. We voted unanimously to revoke your right to occupy this property. You have 30 days to vacate. I stared at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of it was too much. Karen, I said finally, you don't have the authority to evict a man from his own land. You never did. And the fact that you think a clipboard and a phony vote can make it so just proves how unhinged you become. Her face twisted in rage. You'll regret mocking me. I promise you, you'll regret it. I leaned in slightly, my voice low and steady. The only one who's going to regret anything here is you, when you finally push too far and the law comes down on you instead of me. She recoiled as though struck, then spun on her heel and stormed off into the night. I watched her go, the flashlight beam catching her retreating figure, and I knew we were nearing the breaking point. The weeks following Karen's late-night stunt were the tensest I'd ever experienced outside a courtroom. Every time I stepped onto my porch, I felt the weight of her eyes from across the way, watching, calculating, waiting. It was a look of someone who'd gone past reason, past frustration, past even arrogance, straight into obsession. I'd seen that look before in defendants who believed they could outweat justice. It never ended well for them. At first, I thought maybe she'd finally overplayed her hand, that the ridiculous vote to evict me would break her credibility once and for all. But Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Instead of backing down, she doubled and tripled her efforts, peppering every local office with complaints. Code enforcement, zoning, environmental protection, fire safety. She accused me of everything from poisoning the lake to running an illegal business out of my cabin. Most of the officials who came out were professional and polite. A few even rolled their eyes when I showed them my thick binder of evidence, shaking their heads at the obvious pattern of harassment. But every knock at my door chipped away at the peace I'd come here for. Every form I had to fill out, every inspector I had to walk through my property, every letter I had to respond to, it was death by 1,000 cuts. And then came the breaking point. It was a Saturday afternoon when I heard sirens. I stepped outside to see not one, not two, but 3 sheriff's cruisers barreling down the gravel road toward my cabin. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The cruisers skidded to a stop in my driveway, and half a dozen deputies piled out, hands on their holsters. At their head was Sheriff Daniels, face red with barely contained fury. "Harper," he barked, "step away from the house." I raised my hand slowly, bewildered. "What's this about?" "We got a call," he snapped. "Anonymous tip. Said you were stockpiling weapons, threatening neighbors, planning some kind of militia." For a second, I couldn't even process the absurdity. Then it hit me like a hammer. Karen, of course. She'd escalated from petty complaints to outright lies designed to get me arrested, or worse. "You've known me 20 years, Daniels." I said evenly, "Do I look like the type to start a militia?" His jaw worked, but I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it, but procedure was procedure. He signaled to his men, "Search the property." I stepped aside, arms still raised, and watched his deputies spread out. They looked under the porch, peered into the shed, even poked through my woodpile. After 20 minutes, they came back empty-handed. No weapons cache, no militia plans, nothing but a stack of firewood, a shotgun for home defense, and a retired judge who wanted to be left alone. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Damn it, I should have known. False report. Again." I lowered my hands. "You think?" One of the younger deputies approached Daniels quietly. "Sheriff, this is the 3rd time this month she's called in bogus complaints. Maybe it's time we stop humoring her." Daniels scowled, then turned back to me. "You got all this documented, Harper?" I held up my binder. Every last page. He nodded slowly. "Good. Because I think it's time we take this to the DA. Harassment, filing false reports, misuse of law enforcement resources." She's crossed the line. For the first time since this war began, I felt the balance of power shift. Karen had gone too far, and now the law was catching up. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, she was served with restraining order. She wasn't allowed within 50 feet of my property, nor was she allowed to contact me directly or indirectly. When the deputies delivered the papers, I heard her screaming from across the street, her voice carrying to the cold spring air. "You can't do this to me. I am this community." But the law didn't care about her self-appointed throne. For once, she was on the losing end. You'd think that would have been the end of it, but people like Karen rarely go quietly. She tried to rally the HOA, calling emergency meetings, urging them to stand against me. But her cronies had seen enough. One by one, they abandoned her. Some quit the board entirely, while others simply stopped showing up. The young man, Ethan, spoke openly about her sabotage attempt, and soon the community realized just how far she'd gone. Her reign crumbled. Within a month, the HOA voted to remove her as president. The woman who once strutted around with clipboard and a smug smile was now a pariah, her own neighbors crossing the street to avoid her. The last time I saw her, she was loading boxes into the back of a moving truck. She wouldn't look at me, but I caught the stiff set of her shoulders, the way her hands trembled as she slammed the door shut. I didn't gloat, didn't wave, didn't say a word. I just stood on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the queen of control finally dethroned. When the truck pulled away and disappeared down the road, the lake was quiet again, truly quiet. For the first time since I'd moved in, I felt the peace I'd been searching for. Neighbors came by over the following weeks. Some to thank me, others just to introduce themselves without the shadow of Karen looming over them. The community softened, became friendlier, more neighborly, without her constant interference. People remembered what it was like to live free. And me? I settled into my retirement the way I'd always imagined. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons fixing up the dock, evenings by the fire with a good book. Sometimes Johnson would stop by to fish, or Ethan would bring over a six-pack and sit on the porch, shaking his head at how crazy things had gotten. Every once in a while, though, I'd think back to that first day, the moment Johnson stepped out his cruiser, saw me standing there, and said those words that froze Karen in her tracks. "Judge? It's you?" Funny how life works. I thought retiring to the lake meant leaving the law behind. Turns out, sometimes the law follows you not as a burden, but as a shield. And in the end, it wasn't my title that won. It was patience, documentation, and the refusal to bend to a bully. Karen called the cops to try and scare me out of my own cabin. Instead, she exposed herself for what she truly was. And I didn't just gain peace on my little stretch of lake. I helped free a whole neighborhood from her grip. Not a bad way to spend retirement, if you ask me.